The tremor started when Rebecca Martinez was 12 years old. It began as barely noticeable shakes in her left hand during math class, but by the time she graduated high school in Bakersfield, California, both hands would betray her at the worst possible moments. Coffee cups would rattle against saucers. Signatures would look like seismic readings. And when she finally made it to the police academy at 22, her fellow cadets would snicker behind her back every time she reached for her service weapon. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. They called her Earthquake during firearms training. The nickname stuck through every failed qualification test, every disappointed look from Sergeant Rodriguez, every whispered conversation about whether she belonged there at all. But what none of them knew was that Rebecca Martinez possessed something far more valuable than steady hands. She had a mind that could calculate wind resistance, bullet drop, and target movement with the precision of a supercomputer. And on a scorching Tuesday morning in Nevada, that gift would turn a single bullet into the most talked about shot in sniper history. Rebecca's hands had been shaking for as long as she could remember having conscious thoughts about them. The tremor wasn't constant. It came in waves, triggered by stress, caffeine, or sometimes nothing at all. Her mother, Carmen Martinez, had taken her to 6 different doctors between the ages of 12 and 18. Each one had a different theory: essential tremor, anxiety disorder, early onset Parkinson's, vitamin deficiency. The treatments ranged from beta blockers to meditation to cutting out sugar entirely. Nothing worked. What made it worse was that Rebecca had always been drawn to activities requiring precision. She spent hours as a child building intricate model airplanes, her shaking fingers somehow managing to glue tiny pieces together with microscopic accuracy. She taught herself to paint watercolors, developing a technique that incorporated her tremor into flowing, organic brushstrokes. But her true passion emerged during a field trip to the Kern County Sheriff's Department when she was 16. Deputy Chief William Chun had been demonstrating police equipment to Rebecca's criminal justice class when he mentioned the department's sniper program. Something about the mathematical precision required, calculating distance, wind speed, atmospheric pressure, target movement, ignited something in Rebecca's mind. She peppered Deputy Chief Chun with questions about ballistics that impressed him enough to invite her back for a ride-along. That ride-along changed everything. Rebecca discovered that while her hands might shake, her mind could perform ballistic calculations with an accuracy that stunned even veteran marksmen. She could look at a flag waving in the distance and tell you the wind speed within 2 miles per hour. She could estimate distances to within 6 inches across a football field. She could predict where a moving target would be 3 seconds before it arrived there, but none of that mattered during her first day at the Central Valley Police Academy. Rebecca had saved every penny from her job at Martinez Auto Repair, her father Diego's shop, to pay for the academy. Her parents had been skeptical. Carmen worried about the danger, while Diego couldn't understand why his daughter wanted to leave the family business where her mechanical aptitude had made her invaluable by age 18. The academy's firearms instructor, Sergeant Patricia Rodriguez, was a 20-year veteran who had seen every type of recruit imaginable. She prided herself on being able to identify natural shooters within the first week. Rebecca Martinez did not fit that profile. During the initial weapons familiarization, Rebecca's hands shook so violently while holding her Glock 22 that she couldn't keep the sights aligned long enough to press the trigger. "Maybe you should consider a different career path," Sergeant Rodriguez suggested after Rebecca's third failed attempt to hit a stationary target at 7 yards. The comment was meant privately, but in the echo chamber of the indoor range, the class heard it. Jason Murphy, a former Marine who had decided on law enforcement after his military service, was the first to smirk. "Look at those hands go," Murphy whispered to his buddy Kevin Walsh during a break. She's like a paint mixer at Home Depot. The nickname Earthquake spread through the academy faster than gossip at a high school reunion. Rebecca pretended not to hear it, but each use felt like another small defeat. She had dreamed of this since that ride along with Deputy Chief Chun, but now she was beginning to wonder if everyone else was right. What her classmates didn't know was that Rebecca had been studying ballistics with the obsession of a doctoral candidate. Every night after academy training, she would drive to the local library and check out advanced physics textbooks. She learned about external ballistics, how bullets behave in flight. She studied atmospheric effects on projectile trajectory. She memorized ballistic coefficients for dozens of different ammunition types. More importantly, she discovered something that would change her approach to shooting entirely: the concept of natural point of aim and supported shooting positions. Traditional police firearms training emphasized the isosceles stance, standing square to the target with arms extended. For someone with a tremor, this was the worst possible approach. But precision rifle shooting used completely different techniques: prone positions, bipods, breathing control, and most crucially, letting the body's natural stability points support the weapon rather than fighting against involuntary movement. Rebecca started practicing these techniques in secret. She would drive to the abandoned gravel pit outside Bakersfield every Saturday morning at dawn, bringing her grandfather's old hunting rifle and a collection of cardboard targets. The rifle, a Remington 700 in .308 Winchester that her grandfather Eduardo had used for deer hunting, was ancient by academy standards, but mechanically sound. Lying prone with the rifle supported by a makeshift rest, Rebecca discovered something remarkable. Her tremor almost disappeared. The supported position eliminated most of the muscle tension that triggered her shaking, and the methodical process of breathing control and trigger squeeze seemed to calm her nervous system entirely. More importantly, her natural ability to read environmental conditions gave her an enormous advantage in predicting where her shots would land. Within 3 weeks of secret practice, Rebecca was consistently hitting targets at 200 yards, a distance that would challenge many experienced officers. But she kept this skill hidden, knowing that revealing it would only draw more unwanted attention at the academy, where she was already struggling with the standard curriculum. The turning point came during week 8 of the 16-week program. The class was undergoing their second qualification attempt on the standard police course of fire. Rebecca had failed the first attempt spectacularly, managing to hit the target only 12 times out of 50 required shots. Sergeant Rodriguez had been patient, but Rebecca could see the writing on the wall. One more failure would likely mean dismissal from the program. Standing at the 7-yard line with her Glock, Rebecca felt the familiar tremor building in her hands. The whispers had already started behind her. Jason Murphy made a barely audible earthquake sound effect. Kevin Walsh had his phone out, probably recording another failure for the group chat that Rebecca knew existed but pretended not to know about. But this time, instead of fighting the tremor, Rebecca applied everything she had learned during her secret practice sessions. She adjusted her stance slightly, finding her natural point of aim. She controlled her breathing, timing her shots for the natural respiratory pause. Most importantly, she accepted the tremor instead of fighting it, working with her body's rhythm rather than against it. The first shot surprised everyone, including Rebecca. Perfect center hit. The second shot landed just millimeters away. By the time she had fired all 50 rounds, Rebecca had achieved a perfect score, something that only 2 other cadets had managed in Sergeant Rodriguez's 5 years as an instructor. The range fell silent. Jason Murphy's smirk disappeared. Kevin Walsh lowered his phone. Sergeant Rodriguez walked to Rebecca's target, examined it carefully, then walked back with an expression Rebecca couldn't read. "Interesting," was all Sergeant Rodriguez said. But that evening, she called Rebecca aside after class. "I've been doing this for 20 years, Sergeant Rodriguez said, leaning against her desk. I've seen natural shooters, trained shooters, lucky shooters, and shooters who fold under pressure. I've never seen anything like what you just did. That wasn't beginner's luck." Rebecca considered deflecting or making an excuse, but something in Sergeant Rodriguez's tone suggested honesty might be the better approach. She told her about the secret practice sessions, the ballistics research, the discovery that supported positions eliminated her tremor. She even mentioned her natural ability to read environmental conditions. Sergeant Rodriguez listened without interruption, nodding occasionally. When Rebecca finished, the instructor was quiet for a long moment. "I'm going to make a phone call," she finally said. "There's someone you need to meet." That someone turned out to be Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Thompson, a retired Army Special Forces officer who now ran specialized training programs for law enforcement agencies across California. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson had spent 23 years in the military, including multiple combat deployments where precision marksmanship had been the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. 2 days later, Lieutenant Colonel Thompson visited the academy. Rebecca had been told only that a guest instructor would be conducting an advanced marksmanship assessment for interested cadets. 8 cadets volunteered, including Jason Murphy and Kevin Walsh. Rebecca almost didn't sign up, but Sergeant Rodriguez's encouragement convinced her to add her name to the list. The assessment took place at a professional shooting range, 30 miles outside Bakersfield. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson had brought equipment that none of the cadets had seen before: precision rifles with advanced optics, ballistic computers, and targets positioned at distances far beyond standard police training. Police work occasionally requires precision shots beyond the capability of standard firearms training, Lieutenant Colonel Thompson explained to the group. Hostage situations, active shooters in crowded environments, barricaded suspects with elevated positions. These scenarios demand marksmen who can make shots that 99% of officers cannot make. The first test was simple: hit a 6-inch target at 300 yards using a .308 precision rifle. Each cadet would get 3 shots after a brief orientation on the equipment. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson demonstrated the proper shooting position, explained the scope adjustments, and gave basic instruction on reading wind conditions. Jason Murphy went first. Despite his military background, he struggled with the unfamiliar equipment and longer distance. His best shot landed 8 inches from the target center. Kevin Walsh fared worse, missing the target entirely with all 3 shots. The other cadets produced similar results: competent police shooting skills that didn't translate to precision rifle work. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Rebecca went last. As she settled into the prone position behind the rifle, she felt the familiar calm that came with proper support. But this time, she also felt 6 pairs of eyes watching her, waiting for another failure they could laugh about later. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson handed her the rifle and began explaining the scope adjustments, but Rebecca was already reading the environmental conditions. The wind was coming from the left at approximately 8 miles per hour. The temperature was 87 degrees, which would affect bullet velocity slightly. The humidity was low, reducing air density. The target was actually 312 yards away, not 300, she could tell from the angular measurement of reference objects. "Any questions?" Lieutenant Colonel Thompson asked. "The wind's shifting," Rebecca said quietly. "It's going to drop to about 5 miles per hour in the next 30 seconds. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson glanced at his handheld weather meter, then at Rebecca with new interest. "What makes you think that?" Rebecca pointed to a series of reference points, flags, trees, dust patterns, that showed the wind change progressing across the landscape. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson checked his instruments and confirmed she was exactly right. "Proceed when ready," he said. but his tone had changed from instructional to evaluative. Rebecca settled behind the rifle, applied everything she had learned about natural point of aim and breathing control, and waited for the wind to stabilize. Her hands were completely steady. Her mind calculated the precise hold-off needed for distance and wind. When her breathing reached its natural pause, she squeezed the trigger with the smooth consistency of a machine. The spotting scope revealed a perfect center hit. Her second shot landed so close to the first that it was difficult to see both holes. The third shot completed a group that could be covered by a quarter. The range was completely silent. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson walked to his spotting scope, looked again, then walked back to where Rebecca was still lying behind the rifle. "Miss Martinez," he said formally, "I think we need to have a very different conversation." "Lieutenant Colonel." Marcus Thompson's different conversation took place that evening at a diner called Mel's Place, a truck stop restaurant where the coffee was strong and the conversations were private. Rebecca sat across from the retired Special Forces officer, still processing what had happened at the range. The other cadets had left in stunned silence, their assumptions about Earthquake Martinez completely shattered. 23 years. "In the Army," Thompson began, stirring sugar into his coffee, "I've worked with some of the best marksmen in the world. Delta Force snipers, Marine Scout snipers, Navy SEALs. What you did today doesn't happen by accident." Rebecca fidgeted with her napkin, unsure how to respond. The tremor in her hands was barely noticeable now, but she was acutely aware of it. "I've been practicing," she said simply. "Practicing doesn't explain reading wind patterns like a meteorologist or estimating distances with surveyor-level accuracy," Thompson replied. "Those are natural gifts that can't be taught. Combined with the right training, they're extraordinary." Thompson pulled out a tablet and showed Rebecca a series of photographs. They were crime scenes, but unlike anything she had studied at the academy. These were complex tactical situations: a hostage standoff at a shopping mall, a barricaded suspect in a high-rise apartment, an active shooter situation at a school where traditional police response had been insufficient. Each of these cases was resolved by a precision marksman, Thompson explained. Not because we wanted to use lethal force, but because standard police tactics couldn't guarantee civilian safety. In each case, the shot had to be perfect. No margin for error. No second chances. The photographs were sobering. Rebecca could see immediately why these situations had required specialized skills. Traditional police firearms training prepared officers for close-range encounters, typically within 25 yards. These scenarios involved shots across parking lots, between buildings, through narrow windows with innocent people just feet away from the target. "I run a program called Advanced Tactical Precision," Thompson continued. "It's a specialized training course for law enforcement officers who show exceptional aptitude for long-range precision shooting. The program is invitation only, and frankly, most cops don't have the temperament or natural ability for this kind of work." Rebecca studied the tablet images more carefully. In each scenario, she found herself automatically calculating angles, distances, and environmental factors. Her mind seemed to process these complex tactical problems instinctively, breaking them down into mathematical components. "What would this program involve?" she asked. Thompson's expression became serious. 6 months of the most intensive training you've ever experienced. Ballistics, meteorology, advanced optics, fieldcraft, tactical movement, stress inoculation, and precision shooting under conditions that will push you beyond anything you think you're capable of. The failure rate is about 60%, and that's among candidates who are already expert marksmen. The conversation was interrupted by Rebecca's phone buzzing with text messages. She glanced at the screen and saw messages from several academy classmates. Word of her performance at the range had spread, and the reaction was mixed. Some messages were congratulatory, but others carried a different tone. Jason Murphy had texted, "So you were sandbagging us all along?" What other secrets you hiding, earthquake? Kevin Walsh's message was more direct. Heard you shot like Annie Oakley today. Funny how you can't hit shit with a Glock, but turn into Carlos Halfcock with a rifle. Something doesn't add up. Rebecca showed the messages to Thompson, who read them with a frown. This is exactly why the ATP program maintains a low profile, he said. Specialized skills can create resentment among peers who don't understand the difference between standard police work and precision tactical operations. Over the next hour, Thompson outlined the full scope of the Advanced Tactical Precision Program. The training would take place at a facility in Nevada, built specifically for long-range precision shooting. Students would learn to engage targets at distances up to 1,200 yards under various environmental conditions. They would study advanced ballistics, including the effects of altitude, temperature, humidity, and barometric pressure on bullet trajectory. More importantly, they would learn to make life or death decisions under extreme pressure. The program included scenario-based training where a wrong decision or missed shot resulted in simulated civilian casualties. The psychological pressure was designed to replicate the stress of real tactical situations. I have to be honest with you, Thompson said as they prepared to leave the diner. Your tremor will be seen as a disqualifying condition by most people in this field. But what I saw today suggests that you found a way to work with it rather than against it. That kind of adaptability is actually valuable in precision shooting, where conditions are never perfect and shooters have to adjust to their environment. Rebecca drove home that night with Thompson's business card and a decision to make. The ATP program would require a 6-month leave of absence from the police academy, with no guarantee that she would be readmitted if she failed. Her family would worry about the additional risk and uncertainty. Her classmates would likely view her departure as either an admission of weakness or evidence that she thought she was better than them. But the opportunity represented everything Rebecca had dreamed about since that first ride-along with Deputy Chief Chun, the chance to use her natural abilities in a way that could make a real difference. The possibility of turning her perceived weakness into her greatest strength. The next morning at the academy, word of Rebecca's shooting performance had reached Sergeant Rodriguez and the other instructors. The reaction was complicated. On one hand, Rodriguez was proud that her assessment of Rebecca's potential had been correct. On the other hand, she was concerned about the impact on class dynamics and Rebecca's ability to complete the standard Police Academy curriculum. I've had 3 different cadets come to me asking if your rifle shooting means you've been deliberately failing the handgun qualifications, Rodriguez told Rebecca during a private meeting. Murphy seems to think you've been running some kind of con game. Rebecca explained about her tremor, the difference between supported and unsupported shooting positions, and her natural ability to read environmental conditions. Rodriguez listened thoughtfully, occasionally asking technical questions that revealed her own advanced understanding of marksmanship principles. Here's my concern, Rodriguez said finally. If you leave for this ATP program, you'll be seen as getting special treatment. If you stay and continue struggling with handgun qualifications, you might not graduate. Either way, you're facing challenges that other cadets don't have to deal with. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on Rodriguez's office door. Jason Murphy entered with Kevin Walsh and 2 other cadets, looking like a delegation with serious business to discuss. Sergeant Rodriguez, Murphy began, we wanted to talk about what happened yesterday at the range. Some of us are concerned about fairness and standards. Rodriguez's expression hardened. Explain what you mean by that, Murphy. While Martinez has been failing handgun quals while apparently being some kind of rifle expert, it seems like she's been holding back, maybe trying to get sympathy or special treatment. We're just wondering if the same standards apply to everyone. Rebecca felt heat rising in her cheeks, but Rodriguez held up a hand before she could respond. Let me make something very clear, Rodriguez said. her voice carrying the authority of 20 years in law enforcement. Martinez's rifle shooting performance yesterday was evaluated by a retired Special Forces colonel who has trained some of the best marksmen in the military. He was impressed enough to offer her specialized training that maybe one officer in 1,000 gets invited to participate in. Rodriguez stood up, using her full height to emphasize her point. Martinez's handgun struggles are related to a medical condition that she's been working to overcome. Her rifle shooting success comes from natural abilities and extensive self-study that most of you couldn't match if you had 5 years to prepare. Murphy's confident expression wavered. "We just think. I don't care what you think," Rodriguez cut him off. "I care about results." Martinez scored perfect on yesterday's rifle assessment, while the rest of you struggled to hit targets that she was putting bullets through like they were paper. If you spent half as much time practicing as you do complaining, maybe you'd see similar improvement. The delegation left Rodriguez's office looking deflated, but Rebecca knew the confrontation had only made the situation worse. Word would spread that she was getting special protection from the instructors, creating even more resentment. That evening, Rebecca called Lieutenant Colonel Thompson. "I've made my decision about the ATP program," she said. "When do I start?" You sure?" Thompson asked. "This won't be easy, and there's no guarantee of success." Rebecca looked at her hands, watching the slight tremor that had defined so much of her life. "I'm sure. I've spent too many years letting other people tell me what I can't do. It's time to find out what I actually can do." 2 weeks later, Rebecca submitted her leave of absence paperwork to the police academy. The official reason was specialized law enforcement training opportunity. The unofficial reaction from her classmates ranged from jealousy to skepticism to outright hostility. Jason Murphy's parting comment summed up the prevailing attitude. "Hope that shaky-handed rifle shooting works out better than your police career." Rebecca's parents were concerned but supportive. Carmen Martinez had seen her daughter overcome challenges before and recognized the determination in Rebecca's voice. Diego Martinez was proud that his daughter was pursuing something that utilized her natural mechanical aptitude, even if he didn't fully understand the technical details. "Just remember," Diego told her the night before she left for Nevada, "the hands that shake when you're nervous are the same hands that can rebuild an engine or paint a masterpiece. Don't let anyone convince you they're broken just because they work differently." The Advanced Tactical Precision Facility was located in the high desert of Nevada, 60 miles from the nearest town. The compound consisted of several buildings, surrounded by shooting ranges that extended across miles of empty landscape. The longest range stretched nearly 2 miles across a valley, with targets positioned at precise intervals for training at various distances. Rebecca arrived on a Sunday afternoon in March, driving her father's old pickup truck loaded with everything she owned. The Nevada facility would be her home for the next 6 months, assuming she made it through the selection process. There were 12 candidates in Rebecca's class, drawn from law enforcement agencies across the western United States. Most were experienced officers with specialized SWAT or tactical team backgrounds. Several had military sniper training. All of them had demonstrated exceptional marksmanship skills to earn their invitation to the program. Rebecca was the only candidate with a medical condition that affected her shooting ability. She was also the youngest candidate by 3 years and had the least law enforcement experience. During the initial introductions, she could see the other candidates sizing her up and finding her lacking. The first week of a TP training was designed to establish baseline capabilities and identify candidates who might not be suitable for the program. The physical fitness requirements were demanding but manageable for Rebecca, who had maintained excellent conditioning throughout her police academy training. The academic portion covered advanced ballistics theory, meteorology, and tactical decision-making. Rebecca excelled in these areas, her natural mathematical ability and extensive self-study giving her advantages over candidates with more practical experience. but less theoretical knowledge. But the real test came on the shooting ranges. The program began with precision shooting at known distances under ideal conditions, then gradually introduced complications, unknown distances, adverse weather, time pressure, physical stress, and psychological pressure designed to simulate real tactical situations. Rebecca's performance was inconsistent at first. When she could use proper supported positions and take time to read environmental conditions, her shooting was exceptional. But when forced to shoot quickly or from awkward positions, her tremor became a significant handicap. The other candidates noticed. During breaks between training exercises, Rebecca overheard conversations that sounded depressingly familiar. "I don't know how she got invited to this program," one candidate from Oregon told another. "She can't even hold a rifle steady half the time." "Maybe she knows someone," replied a former Marine from Arizona. "There's always politics involved in these specialized programs." By the end of the second week, Rebecca was ranked 8th out of 12 candidates in overall performance. Her theoretical knowledge scores were the highest in the class, but her practical shooting scores were dragged down by situations where her tremor created problems. The program instructor was Master Sergeant Elizabeth Hayes, a former Army sniper with combat experience in Iraq and Afghanistan. Hayes had a reputation for being brutally honest about candidate capabilities and had dismissed several students from previous classes who couldn't meet the program standards. Hayes called Rebecca aside after a particularly frustrating training session where she had struggled with shooting from improvised positions. "Martinez, I need to ask you something directly," Hayes said. "Are you holding back on purpose, or is there something affecting your shooting that you haven't told us about?" Rebecca had been dreading this conversation, but she also knew that honesty was her only option. She explained about her tremor, how it affected different shooting positions, and how she had learned to work with it rather than against it. Hayes listened without interruption, occasionally asking technical questions about how the tremor manifested under different conditions. When Rebecca finished, Hayes was quiet for several minutes. "I've seen a lot of unusual challenges in this program," Hayes finally said. "Candidates who were afraid of heights, candidates with vision problems, candidates who couldn't handle the psychological pressure. I've never had a candidate with a tremor, but I've also never had a candidate who could read environmental conditions the way you do." Hayes paused, looking out across the Nevada desert where heat waves were creating visible distortions in the air. "Here's what we're going to do," she said. "For the rest of this program, we're going to focus on maximizing your strengths rather than trying to fix your weaknesses. You'll never be a quick reaction shooter, but you might become the most precise long-range marksman this program has ever produced." That conversation marked a turning point in Rebecca's training. Instead of forcing her to adapt to standard techniques, the program began adapting to her unique capabilities and limitations. She learned to quickly identify shooting positions that would minimize her tremor. She developed techniques for rapidly assessing environmental conditions and calculating precise holds. Most importantly, she learned to embrace her natural abilities rather than apologizing for her limitations. The transformation was remarkable. By the end of her 4th week, Rebecca was consistently outperforming candidates who had seemed far superior during the early training. Her specialty became ultra-long-range precision shooting, where her ability to read conditions and calculate precise holds gave her enormous advantages over shooters who relied primarily on experience and instinct. The other candidates' attitudes began to change as Rebecca's capabilities became undeniable. The former Marine from Arizona, Staff Sergeant David Chun, became one of her strongest supporters after watching her make 3 consecutive hits on a target at 1,100 yards in variable wind conditions. "I don't care if your hands shake like a paint mixer," Chun told her after that performance. "You just made shots that most snipers couldn't make on their best day." But Rebecca's biggest test was yet to come: the advanced tactical precision programs. Final examination was unlike anything Rebecca had experienced during her months of training. Master Sergeant Hayes had designed a comprehensive test that would evaluate not just shooting skills, but decision-making, stress management, and the ability to operate under conditions that replicated real-world tactical situations. The test scenario was based on an actual incident that had occurred in Phoenix 3 years earlier. An armed suspect had barricaded himself in a 7th-floor apartment building, taking 3 hostages. The building's layout, the suspect's position, and the location of innocent civilians had been recreated in detail at the Nevada facility using shipping containers, elevated platforms, and sophisticated target systems. Each candidate would face the scenario individually, with no knowledge of how others had performed. They would have 30 minutes to assess the situation, identify the optimal shooting position, and execute a precision shot that would neutralize the threat without endangering the hostages. Electronic sensors would measure shot placement too, within millimeters, and any shot that would have caused collateral damage would result in immediate failure. Rebecca was scheduled to take the test on a Thursday morning in late August. The desert heat was already brutal at 0800 hours, with temperatures expected to reach 118 degrees by afternoon. The conditions added another layer of complexity, as heat waves would create optical distortions that could affect long-range shooting accuracy. She had spent the previous evening reviewing her notes on environmental factors and ballistic calculations. Her small room at the facility was covered with charts showing wind patterns, temperature effects on bullet velocity, and diagrams of the test scenario. Other candidates had gone to bed early, but Rebecca's natural tendency toward meticulous preparation kept her studying until well past midnight. The morning of the test, Rebecca felt unusually calm. Her hands showed only the slightest tremor as she cleaned and inspected her rifle, a custom-built .308 Winchester that the program had matched to her specific physical characteristics and shooting style. The weapon was equipped with a Schmidt and Bender variable power scope and a precision trigger that broke at exactly 2 pounds of pressure. Master Sergeant Hayes briefed Rebecca on the scenario details. The suspect was armed with a handgun and positioned near a window with a clear view of the street below. 3 hostages were located in different areas of the apartment, with 2 of them potentially in the line of fire depending on the shooting. Angle selected. Police negotiators had been working for 6 hours with no progress, and intelligence suggested the suspect was becoming increasingly agitated. "Your job is to end this situation with 1 shot," Hayes explained. "You'll have access to the entire facility to select your shooting position, but once you fire, the exercise is over. Success means the suspect is neutralized and all hostages survive. Failure means you don't graduate from this program." Rebecca nodded, shouldering her rifle and walking toward the mock scenario. The facility had been designed to replicate urban shooting conditions with multiple buildings, vehicles, and obstacles that could serve as shooting platforms. The target building was 347 yards away, a distance she had practiced extensively, but never under these specific conditions with this level of pressure. Her first task was reconnaissance. Rebecca spent 15 minutes moving through the facility, identifying potential shooting positions and evaluating sight lines to the target. She used a small rangefinder to confirm distances and studied the wind patterns by observing dust, vegetation, and improvised wind indicators. She had learned to recognize 3 shooting positions offered viable angles to the target. The first was from a rooftop 350 yards away, providing a clear shot but requiring compensation for a slight upward angle. The second was from ground level at 380 yards, offering a more stable shooting platform, but with a narrower window of opportunity. The third position was from an elevated platform at 425 yards, giving the best overall view of the scenario but requiring the most precise environmental calculations. Rebecca's mathematical mind processed the variables for each position. Wind. Speed was approximately 12 miles per hour from the southwest, but the direction was shifting slightly as the morning air heated up. Temperature was 94 degrees and rising. Humidity was extremely low, which would increase bullet velocity slightly compared to her practice sessions and more humid conditions. She selected the elevated platform at 425 yards. The longer distance would make environmental factors more significant, but it also provided the clearest view of all three hostages and eliminated any risk of collateral damage. From this position, her bullet would impact the target at a downward angle that would ensure it stopped in the suspect without endangering anyone behind him. Setting up on the elevated platform, Rebecca deployed the rifle's bipod and settled into a shooting position that had become second nature during her months of training. Her tremor was barely noticeable. The supported position and controlled breathing techniques had eliminated most of the involuntary movement that had once plagued her shooting. Through her scope, she could see the electronic target that represented the suspect. The target was partially concealed behind a window frame, presenting a shooting area roughly 8 inches wide and 12 inches tall. At 425 yards, this target appeared smaller than a quarter through her scope's magnification. Rebecca began her final calculations. The wind had shifted slightly northwest and increased to approximately 14 miles per hour. She could see heat waves beginning to rise from the sun-heated surfaces below, creating optical distortions that would affect her scope's clarity. The target was positioned 11 feet above her shooting position, requiring adjustment for the downward angle, but something else caught her attention. Through her scope, she noticed movement in one of the windows adjacent to the target. The scenario had been designed with remarkable attention to detail, including electronic representations of the hostages that moved periodically to simulate the chaos of a real hostage situation. One of the hostage figures had moved closer to the suspect's position, creating a potential complication that hadn't been present during her initial reconnaissance. The safe shooting window had narrowed to approximately 6 inches, a target that would challenge even the most experienced sniper under ideal conditions. Rebecca checked her watch. She had been in position for 12 minutes, leaving 18 minutes before the test would automatically end in failure. But rushing the shot would be worse than running out of time. Everything she had learned during 6 months of intensive training had emphasized the importance of patience and precision over speed. She continued monitoring the wind conditions, waiting for a lull in the gusting that would provide the most stable flight path for her bullet. Desert winds were notoriously unpredictable, shifting direction and intensity with the heating and cooling of different surfaces throughout the day. At 17 minutes elapsed, Rebecca felt the wind calm slightly. The heat waves were still visible through her scope, but she had learned to read through the distortion rather than fighting it. Her breathing had settled into the controlled rhythm that preceded every precision shot. A 4-count inhale, 4-count hold, 4-count exhale, followed by a natural respiratory pause where her body was most stable. Through her scope, she could see the exact point where her bullet needed to impact. Not the center of the visible target area, but a specific point that would account for the bullet's trajectory, the environmental conditions, and the precise anatomy of the threat she was engaging. 6 months of training had taught her to think beyond simple marksmanship and consider the complete tactical picture. Rebecca's finger found the trigger, applying the steady pressure that would release the firing pin. The rifle's precision trigger had no creep or overtravel. When she reached exactly 2 pounds of pressure, the weapon would fire. She had practiced this trigger squeeze thousands of times until it became as natural as breathing. The shot surprised her, as every good precision shot should. One moment she was settling the crosshairs on her aiming point, and the next moment the rifle was recoiling smoothly against her shoulder. The sound of the shot echoed across the desert facility, followed immediately by the electronic tone that indicated a successful hit. Through her scope, Rebecca could see that the target had registered a perfect center hit. But more importantly, the electronic sensors confirmed that all 3 hostages had survived the engagement. She had successfully completed the most challenging test in the Advanced Tactical Precision program. Master Sergeant Hayes appeared at Rebecca's shooting position within minutes, carrying a tablet that displayed the detailed results of her performance. The shot placement had been measured to within 2 millimeters, well within the acceptable margin for a tactical engagement at that distance. "Outstanding performance, Martinez," Hayes said, reviewing the electronic data. "Shot placement, timing, environmental compensation, tactical decision-making, all excellent. But I'm particularly impressed with your patience under pressure. Lesser shooters would have rushed that shot when they saw the hostage move closer to the target." Rebecca felt a surge of pride, but Hayes wasn't finished with her evaluation. However, Hayes continued, "This was just the final examination. Your real test begins when you're assigned to an actual tactical unit and face situations where there are no practice targets or electronic sensors. Are you prepared for that responsibility?" The question was more serious than congratulatory. Rebecca had spent 6 months learning to shoot with exceptional precision, but she had also learned that precision shooting in law enforcement meant accepting responsibility for life and death decisions. Every shot would be scrutinized, evaluated, and potentially questioned in court proceedings that could last for years. "I understand the responsibility," Rebecca replied. "I also understand that some situations can only be resolved by someone willing to take that shot when it's necessary." Hayes nodded approvingly. "Good answer. Because your first assignment is going to test that understanding in ways you can't imagine." That evening, the 12 candidates gathered for the program's graduation ceremony. 4 candidates had failed to complete the program, 2 due to shooting performance issues, 1 due to inability to handle the psychological pressure, and 1 due to a medical condition that developed during training. Of the 8 graduates, Rebecca had achieved the highest overall scores in precision shooting and environmental analysis. Staff Sergeant David Chen, the former Marine who had become one of her strongest supporters, finished second overall with the highest scores in tactical decision-making and stress management. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson, who had recruited Rebecca from the Police Academy range demonstration, was present for the graduation. During his address to the graduates, he emphasized the rarity of their achievement and the responsibilities that came with their specialized training. Less than 1% of law enforcement officers will ever receive training of this caliber. Thompson told the group, "You have been selected not just for your shooting abilities, but for your judgment, your dedication, and your commitment to protecting innocent lives through the precise application of force when all other options have been exhausted." After the ceremony, Thompson approached Rebecca privately. "I have your first assignment," he said, handing her a sealed envelope. "You'll be joining a federal task force that handles high-risk tactical situations across multiple states. The unit is based in Colorado, and you'll be working with some of the most experienced tactical operators in the country." Rebecca opened the envelope and read the assignment details. The task force was called the Regional Crisis Response Team, and it specialized in situations that exceeded the capabilities of local law enforcement agencies. Hostage rescues, barricaded suspects, active shooter incidents, and other scenarios that required specialized equipment and training. The team leader is Agent Patricia Russo, a 15-year FBI veteran with extensive tactical experience, Thompson continued. "She specifically requested a precision marksman with your capabilities after reviewing your training records. Apparently, they've been dealing with situations that require shots beyond the range of their current personnel." The assignment represented everything Rebecca had worked toward since leaving the police academy. But it also meant leaving California and the family support system that had sustained her through years of challenges and setbacks. "When do I report?" she asked. "Monday morning," Thompson replied. Agent Russo is expecting you at the teen facility. In Denver, they have a situation developing that might require your particular skills. Rebecca spent the weekend driving from Nevada to Colorado, her truck loaded with her personal equipment and the specialized gear she had acquired during a TP training. The route took her through some of the most beautiful landscape in the American West, but she was too focused on the challenges ahead to appreciate the scenery. The Regional Crisis Response Team facility was located in an industrial area outside Denver, designed to look like an ordinary warehouse from the outside. Inside, it contained some of the most advanced tactical equipment Rebecca had ever seen, including multiple shooting simulators, a comprehensive armory, and communication systems that could coordinate with law enforcement agencies nationwide. Agent Patricia Russo was a compact woman in her early 40s with the direct manner of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions under pressure. She greeted Rebecca in a conference room where maps and photographs covered every available surface. "Martinez, welcome to RCRT," Russo said, shaking hands with a grip that conveyed both strength and confidence. "I've reviewed your TP training records, and I have to say I'm impressed. We've been waiting for someone with your capabilities for quite some time." Russo gestured to the materials spread across the conference table. "We have a situation developing in Utah that's going to require precision shooting beyond anything in your training. Multiple suspects, unknown number of hostages, complex urban environment, and political complications that make this a very high-profile operation." Rebecca studied the photographs and maps, her mind automatically processing distances, angles, and potential shooting positions. The scenario was far more complex than anything she had faced during a TP training, involving multiple buildings, moving vehicles, and civilian populations that couldn't be easily evacuated. "What's the timeline?" Rebecca asked. "We deploy in 6 hours," Russo replied. "I hope you're ready for the real thing, because this situation is going to test everything you learned in Nevada and probably a few things they didn't teach you." As Rebecca prepared her equipment for her first operational deployment, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the shaking hands that had earned her the nickname Earthquake to the precision shooting skills that had impressed military veterans, every challenge had contributed to preparing her for whatever lay ahead in Utah. But she couldn't have imagined that within 48 hours, she would execute a shot that would redefine what was considered possible in precision marksmanship. The flight to Salt Lake City took place in a converted military transport aircraft that served as the Regional Crisis Response Team's mobile command center. Rebecca found herself surrounded by equipment and personnel, unlike anything she had encountered during her police academy training or a TP program. These were federal agents with decades of specialized experience, and their casual discussions about previous operations revealed a level of tactical sophistication that both impressed and intimidated her. Agent Patricia Russo conducted the mission briefing while the aircraft was still climbing to cruising altitude. The situation in Utah had begun 3 days earlier as a routine federal investigation into weapons trafficking, but had escalated into something far more complex and dangerous. The targets were members of a militia group called the Mountain Patriots, led by a former Army sergeant named Curtis Blake, who had been dishonorably discharged after a series of incidents involving insubordination and extremist activities. Blake had established a compound in the remote mountains of central Utah, where intelligence suggested he was manufacturing illegal weapons and explosives. The federal investigation had been proceeding quietly until an undercover ATF agent named Sandra Liu had missed 2 consecutive check-ins. Surveillance equipment had detected signs of a struggle at Liu's last known location, and electronic intelligence suggested she was being held at the Mountain Patriots compound along with at least 5 other individuals whose status was unknown. "The compound is located in extremely difficult terrain," Russo explained. pointing to topographical maps that showed the challenge facing any rescue operation. It's positioned on a mesa approximately 800 feet above the surrounding valley, accessible by only one narrow road that's heavily defended. The nearest law enforcement staging area is 12 miles away across open desert. Rebecca studied the aerial photographs of the compound, her trained eye automatically identifying potential shooting positions and sight lines. The layout was tactically sophisticated, clearly designed by someone with military experience who understood how to create defensive advantages. The main buildings were positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire across the access road and surrounding approaches. Guard towers had been constructed at strategic points, offering excellent visibility of the surrounding terrain. Most concerning was the central building where intelligence suggested the hostages were being held. It was positioned in the compound's interior, making any direct assault extremely risky for the captives. Local law enforcement has established a perimeter, but they lack the specialized capabilities to attempt a rescue, Russo continued. The terrain makes helicopter insertion impossible due to high altitude and unpredictable wind conditions. Any ground assault would face a significant uphill approach across open terrain where the defenders hold every advantage. The team's tactical coordinator, Agent Michael Torres, had been studying the compound layout for hours during the flight. Torres was a former Navy SEAL with extensive experience in hostage rescue operations, and his assessment of the situation was sobering. We're looking at a minimum of 15 armed defenders in prepared positions, Torres reported. They have military-grade weapons, night vision equipment, and communications gear that suggests this wasn't a spontaneous situation. Blake has been planning for this kind of confrontation for years. Agent Russo turned to Rebecca, her expression serious. This is where your specialized training becomes crucial. We need to identify shooting positions that can provide overwatch and precision fire support for a rescue operation. The distances involved are beyond the capabilities of our standard tactical team members. Rebecca examined the photographs more closely, using a magnifying glass to study details that might not be visible in the standard briefing materials. The compound was located on a mesa that rose sharply from the surrounding desert, but the neighboring terrain included several elevated positions that could potentially serve as shooting platforms. What's the maximum range from potential shooting positions to targets in the compound? She asked. Torres consulted his calculations. Depending on which positions we can access safely, anywhere from 850 yards to 1,400 yards. The longest shots would be from the ridgeline southeast of the compound. But getting personnel into position, there would require a significant approach march across difficult terrain. The distances were at the extreme end of Rebecca's training, but well within the capabilities she had demonstrated during a TP program. More challenging would be the environmental conditions: high altitude, unpredictable winds, and temperature. Variations that could significantly affect bullet trajectory. I'll need detailed meteorological data for the target area, Rebecca said. Wind patterns, temperature profiles, humidity levels, and barometric pressure readings for at least the past week. I'll also need precise range measurements to all potential target areas and detailed information about the ammunition specifications we'll be using. The flight continued with intensive planning sessions that covered every aspect of the operation. Rebecca found herself working closely with Torres to identify shooting positions that would provide the best combination of concealment, stability, and sight lines to critical areas of the compound. The rescue plan was complex and would require precise coordination between multiple elements. A ground assault team would approach the compound from the north, using the cover of darkness and specialized equipment to breach the perimeter defenses. Meanwhile, Rebecca would be positioned on the southeastern ridgeline, providing precision fire support to neutralize specific threats and protect the assault team during their approach. Most critically, intelligence suggested that Curtis Blake, had positioned explosives throughout the hostage building and was prepared to detonate them if he believed the compound was about to be overrun. This meant that any rescue operation would have only minutes to locate and secure the hostages before Blake decided to eliminate the evidence of his crimes. The timing has to be perfect, Russo emphasized during the final briefing session. We get one chance at this. If Blake realizes we're coming before we're in position to stop him, those hostages are going to die. The aircraft landed at a remote airstrip in central Utah just after midnight. The RCRT team was met by a convoy of local law enforcement vehicles that transported them to the forward operating base that had been established 12 miles from the compound. The base consisted of command trailers, communications equipment, and staging areas for the various tactical elements that would participate in the operation. Rebecca's first priority was confirming the environmental conditions she would face during the operation. The high desert of central Utah presented challenges different from anything she had encountered during her Nevada training. The altitude was nearly 6,000 feet above sea level, which would affect both ballistic performance and her own physical capabilities. Working with the team's meteorological specialist, Rebecca analyzed weather data and atmospheric conditions that would impact long-range shooting. The wind patterns were complex, influenced by the mesa's elevation and the surrounding terrain features. Temperature variations between day and night were extreme, and the dry air would affect bullet velocity in ways she would need to calculate precisely. More concerning was the intelligence update they received upon arrival. Surveillance equipment had detected increased activity at the compound during the previous 12 hours, suggesting that Blake was aware of the law enforcement presence and was preparing for a confrontation. Guard rotations had increased, defensive positions had been reinforced, and electronic intercepts suggested that Blake was becoming increasingly agitated about the situation. We may have lost the element of surprise, Torres admitted during a midnight planning session. Blake's military background means he understands surveillance techniques and counter-surveillance measures. He knows we're here. The timeline for the operation was accelerated. Instead of waiting for optimal conditions, the rescue would commence at 0400 hours, using the period of deepest darkness to mask the assault team's approach. Rebecca would need to be in position on the southeastern ridge by 0300 hours, requiring a difficult night march across terrain that offered numerous opportunities for injury or detection. Rebecca spent the remaining hours before deployment conducting final equipment checks and mental preparation. Her rifle had been zeroed using the specific ammunition selected for the operation, match-grade .308 Winchester rounds that provided optimal accuracy at extreme distances. The scope had been calibrated for the altitude and expected atmospheric conditions. But beyond the technical preparations, Rebecca found herself confronting the psychological reality of what lay ahead. During a TP training, all her targets had been electronic or cardboard representations. In a few hours, she would be shooting at human beings whose deaths might be necessary to save innocent lives. Agent Russo found her conducting a final inspection of her equipment at 0200 hours. Having second thoughts? Russo asked, settling beside Rebecca in the equipment staging area. Not about the mission, Rebecca replied. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous about the responsibility. In training, mistakes meant failing a test. Tomorrow, mistakes could mean people die. Russo nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of awareness we need from someone in your position. Overconfidence gets people killed. Appropriate concern for the consequences keeps everyone focused on doing the job right. The conversation was interrupted by Torres announcing that the operation was commencing. Rebecca gathered her equipment and joined the small team that would escort her to the shooting position on the southeastern ridge. The march would take 90 minutes across terrain that was challenging even with night vision equipment. The approach to the ridgeline required careful navigation across rocky terrain. that could easily cause injury in darkness. Rebecca carried her rifle and specialized equipment, while team members transported additional gear, including ammunition, communications equipment, and environmental monitoring devices that would provide real-time atmospheric data during the operation. Reaching the shooting position required a final climb up a nearly vertical rock face that left Rebecca's hands scraped and her clothing torn despite the protective gear she wore. But the position itself was ideal for the mission, a natural rock formation that provided both concealment and a stable shooting platform with clear sight lines to the compound. Through her night vision scope, Rebecca could see the compound layout exactly as it had appeared in the aerial photographs. Guard towers were manned, and she could observe the defensive positions that would need to be neutralized to allow the assault team to approach safely. But as she settled into her shooting position and began final preparations for the operation, Rebecca noticed something that hadn't been apparent in the intelligence briefings. The compound's layout wasn't just tactically defensive. It was specifically designed to create a situation where any rescue attempt would require multiple simultaneous precision shots to prevent Blake from detonating the explosives that threatened the hostages. The guard positions were arranged so that eliminating one would alert the others, giving them time to signal Blake in the central building. The communication antennas were positioned where destroying them would require shots that might also damage the hostage building. Most critically, Blake himself was visible through a window in the central building, but he was positioned where a single shot might not prevent him from reaching the detonation device. Rebecca realized that the mission's success would depend not on one perfect shot, but on a sequence of shots so precisely timed and placed that the defenders would have no opportunity to respond. She was about to attempt something that had never been done in the history of precision marksmanship, a single engagement that would neutralize multiple targets simultaneously across distances exceeding 1,000 yards. As the assault team reported their readiness to begin the final approach, Rebecca made calculations that would determine whether 6 innocent people lived or died in the next few minutes. At 0357 hours, Rebecca Martinez lay behind her rifle on a rocky outcrop 1,247 yards from the Mountain Patriots compound, facing the most complex shooting challenge in the history of precision marksmanship. Through her scope, she could see 6 separate targets that would need to be neutralized simultaneously to prevent the execution of the hostages held in the central building. The targets weren't aligned in any convenient formation. 2 guards occupied towers on opposite sides of the compound. Another defender was positioned behind a concrete barrier near the main gate. A 4th target was barely visible through a second-floor window of the communications building. The 5th target was Curtis Blake himself, standing near a detonation device in the hostage building. The 6th target was a sentry who had just emerged from a bunker position and was walking toward the communications array. Agent Torres's voice crackled through Rebecca's earpiece. "Overwatch, assault team is in position. We need those targets neutralized in 30 seconds, or we abort the mission." Rebecca's mind processed the ballistic calculations with the speed of a computer. Wind speed was 8 miles per hour from the northwest, but shifting as the morning air began to warm. The temperature was 42 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity was 12%. Barometric pressure was 24.73 inches of mercury, adjusted for the 6,000-foot elevation. But the environmental factors were only part of the challenge. The 6 targets were positioned at different distances ranging from 1,190 to 1,315 yards. They were at varying elevations, requiring different compensation for bullet drop. Most impossibly, they were spread across an arc of nearly 90 degrees, meaning that engaging them sequentially would take far too long and allow the surviving targets to alert Blake. "Overwatch, we need a go or no-go decision," Torres pressed. "The assault team is exposed and Blake is getting agitated. If we don't move now, we will lose our window." Rebecca studied the compound layout through her scope, her trained eye identifying something that the mission planners had missed. The 6 targets weren't randomly positioned. They were aligned along a precise geometric plane that intersected. With a single point in the compound's infrastructure dot, the communication tower in the center of the compound was constructed with a series of metal support cables that radiated outward like spokes on a wheel. These cables were made of high tensile steel, strong enough to support the tower, but also capable of deflecting the high-velocity rifle bullet at precise angles if struck at exactly the right point. Rebecca had discovered this phenomenon during advanced ballistics training, where she had learned that certain materials could redirect bullet fragments with predictable trajectories under specific conditions. The principle was called controlled fragmentation, and it was considered more of a theoretical curiosity than a practical shooting technique. But the geometry of the compound's layout was perfect for applying this principle. A single bullet, fired at the precise intersection point of the support cables, could fragment into 6 separate pieces that would travel along predictable paths to each of the target locations. The calculation required Rebecca to account not just for standard ballistic factors, but for the structural engineering of the tower, the metallurgy of the support cables, the fragmentation pattern of her specific ammunition, and the precise timing of the target's movements. She had perhaps 20 seconds to complete calculations that would normally require hours of computer modeling. "Overwatch, I need 15 more seconds," Rebecca transmitted, her voice steady despite the impossibility of what she was attempting. Her mind worked through the physics with the precision that had impressed Lieutenant Colonel Thompson during that first demonstration at the police academy range. The support cables intersected at a point 1,247 yards from her position, exactly the distance she had confirmed with her rangefinder. The angle of intersection would create a fragmentation pattern that spread at approximately 12 degrees per fragment. Target 1, Guard Tower North, bearing 347 degrees, distance 1,283 yards, elevation 14 feet above the fragmentation point. Target 2, Guard Tower South, bearing 156 degrees, distance 1,301 yards, elevation 18 feet above the fragmentation point. Target 3, Gate Position, bearing 278 degrees, distance 1,205 yards, ground level. Target 4, Communications Building Window, bearing 312 degrees, distance 1,267 yards, elevation 21 feet above the fragmentation point. Target 5, Blake and Hostage Building, bearing 089 degrees, distance 1,234 yards, elevation 8 feet above the fragmentation point. Target 6, Mobile Sentry, bearing 201 degrees, current distance 1,190 yards and moving. Ground level. The moving sentry was the most complex variable. Rebecca calculated his walking speed at approximately 2.8 miles per hour based on his observed movement pattern. The bullet's flight time to the fragmentation point would be 1.73 seconds, during which the sentry would travel approximately 7.2 feet along his current path. Rebecca adjusted her aim point to compensate for all variables: wind drift, bullet drop, atmospheric effects, fragmentation angles, target movement, and the precise structural point where her bullet would need to strike the support cable intersection to achieve the required fragmentation pattern. "Overwatch ready," she transmitted. "All elements execute on my mark," Torres responded. 3.2.1 Execute. Rebecca's breathing settled into the controlled pattern that had become second nature during months of training. Her hands, despite the cold and the stress, showed no tremor as she settled the crosshairs on a point that appeared empty through her scope, but represented the exact intersection of physics, mathematics, and tactical necessity. The trigger brake was perfect. Smooth, straight back, with no disturbance to her sight alignment. The rifle recoiled against her shoulder with the familiar authority of a precision shot, and through her scope she watched the bullet's trajectory across the 1,247 yards of high desert air. The impact occurred exactly as Rebecca had calculated. Her bullet struck the intersection of the support cables with sufficient velocity to fragment into 6 pieces while maintaining enough energy in each fragment to be lethal at the required distances. The fragments spread outward along trajectories that Rebecca's mind had computed with mathematical precision. Fragment 1 struck the North Tower Guard Center mass as he was turning toward the sound of the impact. Fragment 2 caught the South Tower Guard as he was reaching for his radio. Fragment 3 hit the gate defender as he was raising his rifle toward the approaching assault team. Fragment 4 penetrated the communications building window and neutralized the target, who was operating radio equipment. Fragment 5 struck Curtis Blake in the upper chest as he was reaching for the detonation device, spinning him away from the controls that would have killed the hostages. Fragment 6 hit the mobile sentry precisely where Rebecca had calculated he would be when the fragment arrived, dropping him instantly to the desert floor. The entire sequence, from bullet impact to the neutralization of all 6 targets, took less than 3 seconds. The assault team, which had been prepared for a complex coordinated attack, found themselves advancing into a compound where all primary threats had been eliminated by a single shot. Agent Torres's voice over the radio reflected the disbelief that would characterize every after-action report of the operation. Overwatch. What the hell just happened? All targets are down. How did you ... Never mind. Just maintain position and provide security. The hostage rescue proceeded flawlessly. Agent Sandra Liu and 5 civilian contractors who had been held captive were recovered alive and unharmed. Curtis Blake survived his wound and was taken into custody along with 4 other militia members who surrendered immediately upon realizing that their defensive positions had been compromised. The investigation of the compound revealed an extensive weapons manufacturing operation, explosive stockpiles, and evidence of plans for attacks on government facilities that would have resulted in significant casualties. Blake's capture prevented what intelligence analysts later described as one of the most serious domestic terrorism threats in recent history. But the immediate focus of every law enforcement professional who learned about the operation was Rebecca's shot. Ballistics experts who examined the scene initially refused to believe that a single bullet could have produced the observed results. The fragmentation pattern was so precise, the timing so perfect, and the required calculations so complex that it seemed to defy the laws of physics. Federal Bureau of Investigation ballistics specialist Dr. Jennifer Walsh spent 3 weeks recreating the shooting scenario using computer models and test firings. Her final report concluded that the shot was theoretically possible, but practically impossible, requiring a level of environmental awareness, mathematical calculation, and shooting precision that existed at the extreme limits of human capability. Martinez didn't just make a difficult shot, Dr. Walsh wrote in her analysis. She solved a physics problem that would challenge a team of engineers, then executed the solution under life and death pressure with no margin for error. This represents a new category of marksmanship achievement. Rebecca's performance in Utah earned her immediate recognition within the specialized law enforcement community. She received commendations from the FBI, ATF, and Department of Justice. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson, who had first recognized her potential at the police academy, arranged for her to address the graduating class of the Advanced Tactical Precision program about applying theoretical knowledge under operational conditions. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Jason Murphy, her former police academy classmate, who had coined the nickname Earthquake, sent a message through official channels requesting to meet with Rebecca during her next visit to California. The meeting took place at the same diner where Rebecca had first discussed the ATP program with Lieutenant Colonel Thompson. Murphy arrived looking uncomfortable but determined to have a conversation that was years overdue. "I owe you an apology," Murphy began without preamble. "Actually, I owe you several apologies. The things we said, the way we treated you at the academy, that was wrong. We were intimidated by something we didn't understand, so we tried to tear it down instead of learning from it." Rebecca studied her former classmate, seeing genuine remorse in his expression. "We were all under pressure at the academy," she replied. Diplomatically, "No, it was more than that," Murphy insisted. "We saw your hands shake and decided you were weak. We didn't see that you were working twice as hard as anyone else just to keep up with the standard curriculum while secretly developing skills that none of us could match. That takes a kind of strength that I didn't recognize at the time." Murphy paused, clearly struggling with his next words. "I heard about what happened in Utah. I don't pretend to understand how you made that shot, but I understand what it means. You saved 6 people's lives and prevented a terrorist attack because you refused to let other people's opinions define what you were capable of." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, covering the challenges they had both faced since leaving the academy. Murphy had completed his training and was working as a patrol officer, but he had struggled with the transition from military service to civilian law enforcement. Rebecca's success had forced him to reconsider his assumptions about strength, weakness, and what it meant to serve others. "I have one more thing to say," Murphy concluded as they prepared to leave. "That nickname we gave you, Earthquake, I know it was meant to be cruel. But after what you accomplished in Utah, maybe it was more accurate than we realized. You just shake things up in a completely different way than we understood." Rebecca returned to her work with the Regional Crisis Response Team, where she became the lead precision marksman for operations across the western United States. Her success in Utah had established new protocols for long-range tactical shooting and had influenced training programs at law enforcement agencies nationwide. More importantly, Rebecca had proved to herself that the tremor in her hands, the condition that had caused so much doubt and mockery, could coexist with precision and capability that exceeded conventional expectations. She had learned to work with her limitations rather than fighting against them, and in doing so had achieved something that no one else had thought possible. The story of Rebecca Martinez became required reading at the Advanced Tactical Precision Program, not just as an example of exceptional marksmanship, but as a demonstration of how perceived weaknesses could become sources of strength when approached with the right combination of knowledge, preparation, and determination. But Rebecca herself remained focused on the practical application of her skills. Each new operation brought different challenges and different opportunities to protect innocent lives through the precise application of force when all other options had been exhausted. The tremor in her hands never disappeared completely, but it had long since stopped defining what Rebecca Martinez was capable of accomplishing when the moment demanded perfection and 6 lives depended on a single shot that would enter the history books as the most remarkable display of precision marksmanship ever recorded. In the end, they had laughed at her shaky hands. But those same hands had delivered a shot that saved 6 lives and redefined what was possible in the world of precision marksmanship. Rebecca Martinez had turned her greatest perceived weakness into her most extraordinary strength, proving that sometimes the most unlikely people are capable of the most remarkable achievements. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.